Hey, how's it going? My name is Mike. I like to hack around on computers, find ways to automate things. I have a little knowledge of programming, so I want to share that with people. I think it's exciting. I like taking things that would take a lot of time and automating it as much as possible. And I think this video would be a good example of how to automate, say, a particular task that you have to do in Excel using macros. Around for a long time, so this is nothing new. It's kind of new to me because I normally do this stuff doing through a script command line. I read everything in a CSV file. I create a list of objects based on those fields, and then I dump them out to another CSV file in the format that I want. But I figured since I quickly figured out how to do something like this in Excel, I'd share this on YouTube, and maybe you guys would find it interesting, and maybe you can find better things to do for yourself. What I'm not going to discuss is how to turn on the developer mode. You need to do that for Excel to get it to work. It's pretty simple. It takes a few seconds. A Google search can get you there. Even you know, an AI application could help you get that answer. Uh, while we're on the topic of AI, I want to also remind you that you can easily get a lot of help from AI. So I just, put in a search here just so you could see, the kind of responses it gets. And a lot of times it's pretty good. Obviously, it's not perfect. Unfortunately, a lot of people treat this code as gospel, but honestly, you've got to look it over closely, especially in this day and age. Eventually, maybe it'll be much better, but right now, I would just take it all with a grain of salt. Um, so right here, I've got a pretty boring Excel sheet open. Um, I want to define my problem, and then my solution will be the macro. The problem is that I've got a bunch of columns here. None of them are particularly that important, but I want to do things with them. So I've got the start time and end time. We're really just focusing on those two columns, D and E. And if you look at them, they've got dates, but those dates aren't possibly usable. So what are you going to do? So imagine this file having hundreds of thousands of records, or many more than 27 or 26. So what I'm getting at is that you can use a macro to do some of these things. I'm just going to step through how to set up and run the macro, and then from there I'm going to step through the actual code and let you guys understand as a beginner how it kind of works. And you can use AI to help you derive your own macros if you're not that familiar with programming. But it's good to understand how they work so that you can maybe make little tweaks here and there and make them work the way you want. So a lot of times AI is not going to get all of your needs met. So normally, looking at this, we would decide, okay, let's just select all the data, and then we'll just, whoops, let me see, let me do that again. So we've got all these columns here. What we're going to do is we would normally format it as a table, for example. We've got headers. Okay, great. So then we wanted to sort that, so we would do a sort ascending or a sort descending, right? So you notice here, unfortunately, when we when we do the sort, it's actually doing exactly the wrong thing. So the days are all wrong. We've got the 8th, and then the 7th, and then the 5th, 6th, and then the 3rd. So what's going on here? No matter what I do, it's not working. What's going on? So we want these in order by date. It's not working. And if you notice here, what's really happening is it's not treating it as a date. It's treating it as a letter. So you've got Friday because F comes before M comes before S, QRST, UVW. So that's obviously a problem. So in addition to that, we don't have duration. I want a duration here, giving me the differential time between these two. So I want like one, whatever it is. I'm not going to do it on the fly, but 1 minute or whatever it is. So nice thing about that is that we can easily code that. And I want to also preserve the data, so I don't want to change the start and end times here. I just want to use them and organize the data based on that. So we're going to create 2 more columns, 3 total. We'll have a formatted date and formatted date for the start and end times, and then we'll have a duration as the final result. And then after we do our sorting, we can decide to delete those additional columns if we decide we don't need them anymore, or we can replace them, whatever you want to do, but you get the idea. So the first thing I'm going to do is revert what we did, because I don't want to do any manipulation on this yet. So this is where we're at, back at the beginning. This is a CSV file. If you don't know what a CSV file is, let me just show you real quick in a plain text editor. So they call it comma delimited. It can be tab delimited, but it's basically just kind of like raw data. It's very simple, and that's how a lot of data is presented outside of coming out of a database and so forth. So now that we got that out of the way, so normally what we can do is go to developer. We've got macros listed here. So if we were going to run a macro, we would click on it, and then we would select the macro and run it. So this process here is the process we're going to use to actually make that available. So first thing we're going to do is go to Visual Basic, that icon there, and it opens it up. And then you're going to go to Insert, and we're going to insert a module. Okay, so let's do that. Yay, that's exciting. So over here I've got Microsoft Visual Studio Code running, and this is a macro. So I'm not going to discuss this right now. We'll do this after we run, and then you can see how it works. Again, this is for that part of it will be a good introduction, and it might just be a nice thing for somebody who knows how to code and wants to see how it's done, or somebody who wants an idea of what's going on with the script a little bit, and maybe they can get by with AI and figure it out that way. So let's copy this code, and we're going to drop it in here. And you don't actually have to save it because it's part of this session. So I'm just going to go ahead and, now it's copied in, I'm just going to close this whole Visual Basic window. Okay, so we're still under developer. Again, you have to enable development for you to be able to do this. It's really easy to do. But we're going to go to the macros now, and hopefully it's there. So we've got our little macro. It named it after the subroutine. So I'm just going to go ahead and run it. And since there's just a little bit of data, it was very quick. So what it did was it took the data from this column here, and processed it and dumped it over here as a copy with the dates that we can use now to sort. And like I'm sure you can tell, what happened with the end times was the same thing. I gave it the name end clean. That hopefully makes enough sense to you. So then it created an end time. That's great. Using those data points, those 2 data points, we can now create a duration. So we've got the durations for all of these calls. That's great. Just completely automated it, and that's the point. You know, that you can do a lot of these things and make your day-to-day tasks much easier. That's what I ultimately wanted. So, okay, now this all makes more sense. So it counts up from the 9th back down to the 3rd. So in the end times, I basically had some mistakes there. So in the dates in 1 or 2 places, I think it was the Saturday. Again, this is all fictitious data that I just made up, and I made a human error there. All right, so moving past that, let's look at the actual code. And as you're building code, you're going to define the variables that you want to use. So when you want to set a variable to something, you're going to first define it. One, makes it much easier to read. 2, you're defining it within the scope. So it's just something you're supposed to do. If you look here, you're going to see that the subroutine is what's being run. So you should recognize this title because that's the title of the macro. And then there's a helper function here that actually processes the stamps. So if the timestamp is wrong, when it passes it in, it cleans it and gives back that timestamp that we saw in the subsequent fields that it created. So as it goes through each one of these, it's going to go from I equals 2 to the last item. It's going to go down. And as it's doing that, it's going to be building out with that helper function. It's going to take each value and create a new value that we want and place it in there. And then do the same for this one based on this column here. So, and then while it's doing that, it's going to also create the duration. This code is a quick and dirty example. There's are some things that I wouldn't do normally, but just for simplicity, I'm going to leave it the way it is. So these are our variables, and you declare these as such, and these are what's going to be used to set a value to something, so you can think of them as X, Y, and Z in terms of math. So this first line here, we're assigning the worksheet WS is the variable, and we're setting that to the first page worksheet. Then we're going to get the last row. It's going to go all the way down to the last row, and then it's going to grab the first non-empty cell and get that value. So that's the value that's going to allow us to scroll through all of those values. So we're going to start I equals 2, and we're going to go to the last row. So that's going to capture all that data and go through 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. I is going to increment, so you're going to see I equals 1, 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and that's how a lot of code works. It's just going to loop and loop and loop. It's going to go from 1 to 100 to do some kind of calculation or something, for example, that kind of thing. Summarizing something, So that's one of the fundamental things of programming. You just have to know that whenever you see 4, it's going to be counting in a loop. And that's what can make things slow too, because you could have a loop inside of a loop inside of a loop inside of a loop, and that's when programming becomes complicated, and you try to minimize those kind of speed degradations, optimizing the code and that kind of thing. So yeah. Anyway, so as we've set our worksheet to the first page, we're going to go through all those cells. So if you look here, you're going to see that we're referencing the start and end times by using that WS variable, which got the cells from the first page of the worksheet, and its I is 2, and 4 is column D, and 5 is column E. So if you look over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are those columns. It's doing it by number, 4 and 5. So it's grabbing this value and this value right at that moment. Right as it grabs those values, it's looking to see, okay, and now this is just code saying, well, if the data is empty, we want to do anything. So it's saying if the start time is not equal to empty, which it hopefully does have a value, and it does, and that the end time also has a value, then we can proceed. And that's where we have this variable called clean start and clean end. We defined it up here. And what's going to do is pass this value, this start time value that it got. So it's going to take this value here, pass it into our helper function that's down here, manipulate the data, that string, and turn it into this value here. So then that helper function is turning this into this. So it's going to do that for both. Now that it has those values, we're going to do something with those two values. We've got to put them in the columns that they belong in. So we're going to also, this shouldn't be here, but it's okay that it's here, but it's going to set the title here, this duration. And the same with these other two, where are they? There's a cells, those are here, I'm sorry, those are here. So it sets these titles. That really should be done once. Unfortunately, I put it in the wrong place because I was quickly doing this, and it's going to just continually do it, which just means it's doing more work than it needs to. And maybe that's a good example of what you shouldn't do, so I kind of left it in there to see what people do, what can cause more problems in terms of runtime, but it actually might work. So you have to pay attention to those things when you're writing code. So anyway, let's move on. So now that we have these new values, we've got to assign them back to cells. So what we're doing is just very, very simply taking the data here, cleaning it here, which means we're giving it a date that actually can be used with our helper function. Then we're going to, after that, we're going to go here and set it to the cells G and H. So 7 and 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 get the new values. Very simple. And guess what? You could probably figure it out, but column 9 will get the duration. So one last step is to add the duration. So right here we're doing the duration, and that's dumping the duration in this format to the cell. It's basically getting the result, setting it to that cell, and then making a number format to the cell. So it's doing that, and then what it's going to do is just, like I said, it's going to continue and continue and continue through this loop, which could take us, very quick, or if you have a lot of data, it actually would take, it could take minutes. And when it's done, you'll get this like message box, and that's the end of it. If you haven't used VS Code, you should. It does a really good job of marking up this text here so you can see it much more clearly. All these lines here are comments, so it's easy to delineate what's comment and what's code. Good code always has comments like this in it. There's other flaws with this. This code also doesn't. It's not super robust, so it's using actual hardwired column numbers. So if I were to come into my sheet here and just say I randomly decided to delete this column, everything would be shifted over by one, and the column numbers that it's asking for here in the code would just be the wrong ones, and it wouldn't be able to do the math, and you get an error message. So you'd have to come in here and manually change these to the lower numbers. You'd have to count them back in that example. And so forth. I'm not going to go through all of them, but that's basically what would kind of happen. So column D and E would become, E, one less, so it'd be E and D instead of D and E or something like that. Or C and D, I mean. So that's the kind of thing that could be written better. This is specifically looking for column D. You could have ways where you look up the columns, and then based on the name of the column, you do these kind of things, so that if the column moves around, the macro would still work correctly, things like that. So there's always a drawback, because the more code you introduce, the more problems you introduce, and sometimes keeping it simple stupid. The KISS method is definitely the best way to go. So anyway, hopefully this was useful to you, and in the comments, if you tell me you want to see more things like this. I have knowledge in many different languages, so I might just try posting things, kind of like just a hackathon of different things, just like kind of keep it interesting. So anyway, this stuff's exciting to me. I hope you think it's exciting too. And anyway, it was nice chatting about it. So let's wrap it up, and have a great day. All right, take care.